from the studios of the Bakersfield, California, it's time to open up with real people, real talk about real stuff. And now, a special welcome to our friends throughout California, across the nation, and around the world to this week's edition of Open Up.
It's time to open up. I'm Don Clark.
And I'm Bob Brader.
And we're your second favorite pair on the air.
Well,
Tina is gone. She's back in the Carolinas, her home, and actually meeting with the governor back there, and perhaps having her on the governor there by Skype or by radio. We'll see how that works out.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, she's aiming for the president. She thinks high.
Go, Tina, go.
Listen, you know, this show was conceived to be a source of encouragement to people going through hard times, to be a resource for people with businesses, but this time we also take some shows and really devote ourselves to issues that we think are crucial to our country, to our nation, to our world, and we've got one of those today.
Oh, we most definitely do.
If you are, let me suggest, strongly recommend, if you're a Christian, I think you need to watch this show. If you are a Jew, you need to watch this show. If you are a Muslim, you need to watch this show. If you are an American citizen concerned about our nation and the unity of our nation, the divisions in our nation, I think this is a show that you will find great profit in watching, because we're here as part of an effort to bridge what we call the Christian-Muslim divide. And to do that, I think we need to face the toughest questions that we can face about Islam and see if we can get beyond that, resolve them, or else just deal with them directly. So we have in our first segment, Bob, Stafford Beatty. Stafford is the professor of religious studies for some 42 years. Stafford at California State University, a distinguished professor and author of many well-selling books and many important articles. And Stafford comes to us as a student of comparative religions, professor of comparative religions, and one who's invested a lot of scholarly research in Islam. And Stafford, I think you come to us today with some real concerns and critiques about Islam, and we want to hear them. So take it away. What if you just start out, what do you think is the central thing that strikes you when someone says Islam? Go ahead.
Well, I am here to ask some hard questions, and I'm glad to know that we have Imad here who can answer these questions. I'm very curious to see what he has to say. I have kept up with the critique of Islam, especially since Islamic State has gotten started, and I am concerned about that face of Islam. And I know all Americans are too.
Yes.
So I speak for all Americans. I'm well aware that that most Muslims the world over, and probably the overwhelming majority in America, are good people who want to live with their Christian neighbors in peace, their Jewish neighbors in peace, and perhaps even their Hindu neighbors in peace, though that's more of a stretch, more of a difficulty, for reasons I'll go into. But polls keep showing that the radical Muslims, constitute about 15 to 25% of the entire Muslim population. So we're talking somewhere around maybe 300 million people on the planet who are sympathetic to the goals of Islamic State, perhaps not to the radical degree, but are sympathetic to the idea that there's only one true religion, and it is destined to rule the world, and it should rule the world, and Islam is going to see to it that it does, one way or another, in time, rule the world to the extermination of every other contender. And this is the kinds of propaganda or fact, whatever you want to call it, that Americans and Western Europeans and non-Muslims are concerned about. Indeed, Shia Muslims are concerned about this mostly Sunni point of view. Hindus are very frightened of this point of view because they are regarded as infidels, because they are, quote, polytheists. And as some Muslims have said, they deserve nothing but death. And indeed, over the history of India's last 1,300 years, that's what an awful lot of Hindus got when their country was invaded by Muslims starting in the 8th century and carrying right on through until the British arrived in the 19th century. It's a very frightening story. So these are the kinds of questions that I want to throw at Emad. We are absolute brothers when it comes to the view that we share with respect to, how shall he put it, the ethics, the virtues, and the morality that our religion, that Christianity and Islam share. They are very similar. There's an emphasis on loving one's neighbor. There's an emphasis on loving God, and the love of neighbor is, of course, based on that love of God. So there's so much to share, but there are these frightening perspectives that are arousing and frightening to non-Muslims. And these are the points that we can get into in a little bit more detail, but at least this is a good start. Don?
Stafford, in my own profession of journalism, one of our principles of trying to get to the truth is if you want to understand the true nature of anything, trace it back to its origins. Right. When you trace, in your research, Islam back to its origins, what is there that concerns you? What is there that gives you hope?
Well, first of all, we know how it originated. It originated when, and this is the Muslim point of view, when God began to reveal himself to Muhammad through the angel Gabriel. The angel Gabriel was kind of a medium between God and Muhammad. So what comes through that communication is what we now call the Quran. And the Quran has mostly verses that to read would be inspirational, no doubt about it. Again, the emphasis when it is placed on ethics, virtues, and morality sound very Christian. So we applaud those verses. But we also have verses like the following, which are very scary to us. I'm talking about Surah 66, verse 9. And this is the way it reads. O prophet, this is God speaking to Muhammad. O prophet, make war upon infidels and unbelievers and treat them with severity. And that's what's been happening for the last 1,300 years as I read history. And this is a very threatening and unfriendly text to those of us who are not Muslim. It sounds as if God is really interested in spreading only one religion across the face of the planet. And that religion would be, from the Muslim point of view, his religion, the religion that God has dictated to us through the Quran and through Muhammad. So it all gets started there. And as you know from even a casual view of history, over the next 200 years, Islam was spread by the sword across anywhere from Spain to India. Vast numbers were slaughtered as Muslim invaders moved across the known world, spreading what they thought was God's truth, and feeling that anything that stood in the way should be removed by violence if necessary, by conversion preferably, but by violence if necessary. And so we see that happening from Spain to India.
Stafford, in the context of your recent research on what's going on, where do you place the president of Egypt, I think it's El-Sisi, and his strong critique of violent Islam? Where do you put that?
I see that as I hope it's sincere, and I think it is. I see that as I was surprised to read that, and I was, of course, delighted to read it. We need more like that. We need more Muslims speaking out.
Explain more to our viewers what the President of Egypt had to say in a historic speech. On Christmas Eve, I think he went to a Christian service, a Coptic Christian service, to the applause and surprise of that crowd. And then was it on New Year's Day, was it, that he delivered this historic speech, really standing up for a different kind of Islam, or perhaps the true kind of Islam, he would say.
Well, I hope it is the true version of Islam, and certainly if his view of Islam is the correct one, is the true one, then Muslims are my brothers and sisters. There's no question about it. But he has been at least publicly appalled at what's been happening to the Christian minority in his country. And he is ready to prosecute those who violate Christians and tear down their churches and rape their women. These are the types of things that he, at least publicly, seems to be ready to prosecute and to prevent from happening in the future. What happened, I believe it was in Tunisia recently, is a case in point. He condemned the slaughter by Muslim radicals of Christians. I think they were Coptic Christians. And he publicly condemned that act. We need more of that. We need brave Muslims to stand up and speak out against these marauders. So, bravo to him.
Stafford, I'm dominating the conversation here, but one more question.
All right.
Now I'm going to lose my train. When you just Google Muslims who stand against violence, I mean, the list goes on and on and on.
Mm-hmm.
A very prominent, people. I hear it often. I heard it when I was a journalist. Why don't we hear, more Muslims standing up against this? And in fact, I get the impression that that the media really hasn't covered their objections, their protests, their condemnations. What do you think? Do you see that?
I think it's relatively easy to sign on board. It's another thing, though, to write an editorial for the New York Times and publish it and come out strongly condemning Muslim radicals. That could cost you your life. Perhaps not in New York City, perhaps not in LA, but still in all, there is a certain danger of coming out and speaking so powerfully, so strongly against the radical elements in Islam. So what I want to see are more editorials written by these Muslims who sign on. And I don't see much of that. And I don't know why, but I have wondered if, number one, it could be that they fear for their lives. And number two, and this is what's more disturbing to me, is that deep down, they really believe that Islam is destined to rule the world, is destined to conquer all of the religions of the world, and not to live in peace with them. I have feared that perhaps they see God or Allah as working in strange ways through these violent, radical uprisings. So I hope that that my cynicism here is misplaced, but it certainly has occurred to me, and it's occurred to others as well. Islam knows how to put on a good face for Westerners. They're very adept at that. And let's hope that the good face that we see put on by the president of Egypt is a sincere face. I suspect that it is in his case.
Bob, forgive me for letting
It's
you
okay.
sit here
Listen,
like a
I
pup on the rock.
have so many questions and so many thoughts, but we've got to take a break like
Okay.
right now.
And
so
when we come back, we're going to hear from Ahmad Mirza, who will sit in with Stafford now. And then after that segment, we're going to hear from Ahmad alone. And if Ahmad's willing to do that, in the last segment, we'll bring them both back together to close out the show. I think we're dealing with some very important issues here.